Take Back Your Health Now, Episode 69.
You're listening to the Take Back Your Health Now podcast, the show that interviews the top doctors, athletes, trainers, and entrepreneurs to help you find the holy grail of health. Now here's your host, Dr. Dan Margolin.
Hi, this is Dr. Dan Margolin with another segment of Take Back Your Health Now, where we pull out all the stops in search of health's holy grail. I'm very excited to have Dr. John Day on the show. He is a cardiologist and medical director of the Intermountain Heart Rhythm Specialists in Salt Lake City, Utah. He received his medical degree from John Hopkins and completed his residency and fellowships in cardiovascular medicine and cardiac electrophysiology at Stanford University. Dr. Day's book, The Longevity Plan, 7 Life-Transforming Lessons from Ancient China, recounts Dr. Day's experience living with and studying the centenarians of Bapan, China. Bapan, hopefully I'm saying that right, B-A-P-A-N, has the highest rate of centenarians in the world with 1 per 100 people. Dr. Day took the information he learned from the remarkable centenarians of Bapan and applied that information back to his own life and his medical practice, and he's here today to talk to us about it. Dr. John Day, thank you for joining us, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me come on your show. I love what you're doing.
Well, thank you. This is really, really exciting for us because I think your book and the whole concept of this interview fits really along with what we're looking for, which is really the holy grail of health. And I'm excited to have you sort of open up that holy grail and help us in that direction, sir. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get involved in even writing this book? Just start from the beginning, even in terms of medicine. How did you get started in medicine, and how did it go in this direction?
All right. Well, we're going to go way back in time. With regards to medicine, it's rather strange. And I don't know if you're the same way, but as far back as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a doctor. No one's in my family is a doctor. I don't know where I got this crazy idea, but it was almost as if that was part of my destiny. And not only did I want to be a doctor, as I knew I always wanted to be a cardiologist. Don't ask me how that came. Somehow I was pre-wired with this direction in life.
I mean, I had a very similar experience. Like I'm a podiatrist. I didn't always want to be a podiatrist. I wanted to be a doctor in some way. But it was, even as young as 3 years old, I remember thinking that. So you took that dream and that goal and you ran with it for sure.
Absolutely. And that, it becomes almost, if you will, your life's calling, your life's mission. And I was doing very well as a cardiologist, rising to leadership positions of our medical society, editors of journals, all of that. And what people often don't realize is doctors also have health issues as well. And the way we approach them as doctors, sometimes, we don't always make the best patients. And, I certainly was going through that myself in my mid-40s.
What, in terms of what?
There were a number of things that are happening. And I think this is what a lot of people find is that you're generally fine till maybe your 30s, 40s, 50s, depending on your genes, things start to kick in. In my case, I was living off that standard American diet, busy lifestyle. And what a lot of people don't realize, in almost every doctor's dining lounge of every hospital, you will find free donuts, free bagels, free cream cheese, free Coca-Cola products. And I readily partook of all of those, but I didn't even think much about it. I was exercising every day. I thought I was healthy. I thought I was invincible until my mid-40s. And then it's almost overnight, I found myself with an autoimmune condition, ankylosing spondylitis, eosinophilic esophagitis, hypertensive. I was overweight. Cholesterol was high. And almost overnight, I was on 5 different prescription medicines, felt horrible. And what I really loved doing was exercising and playing basketball with my children. I couldn't do it anymore. I had troubles even getting through my cases at the hospital.
How, if you don't mind, how heavy were you? How much overweight were you?
I wasn't, I was considered overweight by the government statistics, which means my BMI was, somewhere in that 26 to 30 range. And so I wasn't morbidly obese or anything like that, but certainly, I was carrying 20, 30 pounds more than I should have been carrying. And when it comes to a lot of these conditions, sometimes it doesn't take that much extra weight to start a cascade of events.
So I'm assuming you also had the high blood pressure and all the things that go on.
Oh yeah. Went along with all that. At the beginning of the interview, you asked me, as a writer, did you set out to write a book? And no, that was like the farthest thing from my mind. I do a lot of medical writing, publish a lot of scientific articles, but as far as writing a book, never even crossed my mind.
What was the thing that made it cross your mind? What was the thing that sort of pushed you in that direction?
So that really takes me as how did I get from this state where seemingly overnight in my mid-40s, all of a sudden all of these health conditions and health falling apart and on medications and feeling awful, is one thing about myself is I speak fluent Chinese, and I regularly, as part of with leadership roles within medical societies, I've often asked to lecture at these big cardiac meetings in China. I think they especially like me coming over as a Caucasian guy giving my lectures in Chinese. But through these associations,
I'm just going to stop you for once. How did you learn to speak Chinese?
Learning to speak Chinese was part of volunteer church mission service that I did as part of my faith, ages 19 to 21. And then, as I mentioned, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. But the nice thing about getting into medical school is that you can really major in whatever you want to major in. And in my case, I knew I was going to be a doctor for the rest of my life. And so after this church mission experience, volunteer service experience, I majored in Chinese. And it's something that I've kept up over the years. And it really worked out well with this because as part of all these trips to China and teaching the physicians in China how to perform these procedures and giving lectures at the conferences, I was introduced to this village, which they have now called the Longevity Village, which has the highest percentage of centenarians in the world, where these people not only live to age 100 and beyond, they're thriving. They don't have doctors. They don't have hospitals. They're not on medications, but yet they're thriving, and they'll all tell you they're living the best years of their lives. And so based on all of this, and then based on the research that I'd done through the Chinese medical literature, it was really my wife who said, we got to go. So we took our family on a number of adventures to this village, and our experiences there just kind of naturally flowed into what you now see in the book, The Longevity Plan. But that wasn't part of the original expedition.
Now, Dr. Day, so when we look at, and you're saying here that there 1 in per 100 people lived over 100. What is it in our country? Like how many per 100 live to be over 100, or is there any?
Now, that's a great question, and I should just explain that number a little bit. For example, in the United States, it's about 1 in every 5,500. The famed islands of Okinawa and Japan, it's maybe 1 in every 1,600. How did we get to that ratio of 1 in 100? It's a little bit skewed. For people who are familiar with modern Chinese history, there's been this mass exodus of the younger population from these rural villages in China to the big cities, the big sweatshop factories, so they can make our iPhones, our Gucci, whatever, handbags, watches, you name it. And so as a part of that, a big chunk of the younger population has moved to these big sweatshop factories of China and the big cities. So that's skewed a little bit, if you will, the denominator of that.
Sure. No, I understand. How much do you think it skewed it?
It's skewed it fairly significantly. For example, in the village, they're certainly in middle age and older, they're well represented, and there are children. But there's a missing. People between the ages of about 20 to 40 or 45 are not well represented because they're all making our iPhones in the big cities of China.
Well, is there a one-child policy still there?
There has been for many years, but that has recently been lifted. Now it's a two-child policy. And so that may or may not change things as China now is quickly becoming very modernized in their big cities, and people are very busy with dual income families. That's now become a bit of a hardship for them. So China, like many other countries around the world, are really faced with how are they going to support this older population of retirees because the younger generation are just not having that many children. And so the government recently changed it to try to stimulate things.
Interesting. I mean, it's almost the same thing that if you read like Robert Kiyosaki's book, The Prophecy, where he's talking about the same thing here, where basically because of the aging of the population, you're looking at a crisis economically because there's not going to be enough young people to support the older people. So it's funny that, not funny, but it's a sad statement that they're running into the same kind of a situation there. Let me ask you, so when you're saying over 100, what is the oldest person that's ever lived? I've heard numbers like 130. Are those true?
Well, it depends on how you define it. And I would have to quickly do a quick search on Google, Wikipedia for the longest live person. I know there have been a number that have gotten into the 120s. And these are people that have, well documented based on birth certificates and that. And that really brings up an interesting question is, what is the ultimate, or what is the ceiling, or is there even a ceiling to how old humans may live?
Yeah, no, it's really, and not only that, but how can they be productive up to what age? So you're saying, like, when you see these people that are over 100, they're not sitting in a wheelchair, they're not in a bed propped up, they are active, they are moving. Is that what you found?
Absolutely. And that is the really fascinating thing is every centenarian in this village, and we've been going to this village for many years now, every centenarian in that village is still working full time, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, what they're doing has changed. If you were to go back in time to this village maybe 10 years ago, they would have been out working in the fields, doing hand farming. And then if health issues came up, then they might be in the home taking care of children. And most of these centenarians, in fact, if you look at the studies that have been published, 74% of the centenarians living in this longevity belt of China live in 4 or 5 generational homes. And so the fascinating thing is they're not put out to pasture. They're not sent off to the nursing homes. They are still contributing. They are very well revered. And in fact, it's a status symbol. Every extra year you can add to your life. Now, the work they're doing now in the last 10 years has changed. Because of all of the studies that have been published on just the remarkable longevity of these people, there's a new health tourism economy that is starting to crop up, where people from around China, as they're getting all these modern health conditions from living in the big cities, are traveling by the busloads to this small, remote, mountainous village in southwest China to try to learn learn their secret. And so as the busloads come by, these centenarians meet and greet with them every single day. And then a lot of them will leave donations. And the centenarians feel like they're still needed. Like these donations that they receive are helping to support their 4 or 5 generation family.
Wow. We're going to go into it in a little bit, the different lessons you learn, but I have to assume that these people feeling like they're part of something and having a purpose has got to be a very important aspect to longevity.
It is. And that is something that is often lost here in the U.S. is it's often been said, and I've certainly seen it in my practice as a cardiologist, the most dangerous day in a man's life is the day he retires. Because for many men, that's when they lose that sense of purpose. Now, women seem to do better because they're more socially connected to their families, to the community. And so they seem to do much better in that transition from working life to retirement. But for men, it's a huge struggle. And many studies show that, their risk of dying is often twice as high as those who do seem to have a life purpose.
Dr. Dave, as a podiatrist, I deal with an older patient base, if you would, and I've met I've been doing this 30 years. I met so many elderly gentlemen that were like, hey, I'm going to retire. I'm so excited. They'd be for years. They're like, I can't wait. I'm going to retire in 5 years, in 3 years, in 2 years. And then they retire, right? And they're excited for a couple of months. And then, I see them a year later and they're depressed. And then now they're talking about how wonderful the days were when they were working. And I laugh because I remember being with them all those years and them telling me how horrible it was and stuff like that. And then, unfortunately, I've seen many of them also, like you said, they don't have a game to play and they die or they get very ill and things like that. So it's always been in the back of my mind that, when the day does come to retire, that you have something to retire into, that you continue with some purpose rather than just sitting there and watching television or something like that.
Exactly. Dreaming of sitting on that beach may be great for a few weeks, but you're going to be bored out of your mind pretty darn quick. You really need that sense of purpose, that drive, something that you're progressing toward.
Absolutely. Dr. Day, I did jump forward a little bit. You were talking about you find out about this village. You, your wife, your children decide to actually go there. So go back to that and tell us when you first walk into this village, what's your reaction, your wife's, your children? How did that play out?
Well, first of all, if any of your listeners wanted to get there, it's pretty hard to find. I mean, this is pretty darn remote. It's going to be multiple flights, a long bus ride, multiple transfers, and then you go up this little windy mountainous road to find this village. And in fact, the first time there, we actually went to the wrong village. And so it took us a while to finally get there and do a course correction. But probably the most striking thing besides the beauty. I mean, the beauty is absolutely amazing. It's almost as if you looked at one of those kung fu movies of China with those limestone karst steep mountains, lush green. That's what you see. I mean, you're first just amazed at the beauty, which stands in stark contrast to, the big cities and the pollution of China. I mean, here you're out in the middle of nowhere with just nature and these mountains. But as you get to the village, there, right as you go across the bridge over the river leading into this small village, about 550 people, is you're greeted by a sign. And the sign has a picture of each of the centenarians and then their life's history, which stands in stark contrast in the U.S. As you enter into a cities, you see the billboards, the Calvin Klein underwear ads or whatever, the young, sexy models. Here, they are celebrating age, experience, wisdom. And it's almost as if these centenarians have become local celebrities.
Unbelievable. I wrote a book called Fast Tracking Your Prosperity. I wrote it for my daughter, who at this time is 9 years old, but hopefully when she gets a little bit older, she'll read it. But it was really some of the things that I found in my life that I saw people do right and I saw people do wrong. And it was my attempt to pass on some of my wisdom to my daughter. And I just haven't seen that. And I often thought if I could have a time now at this point in my life to sit with my grandparents and actually absorb their wisdom and find out. But it was never really left to me. You know what I mean? So it sounds like this is really revered in China more so than it is here. Is that true?
Exactly. Their whole concept of aging and, birthdays aren't something to be ashamed of, but it's something to celebrate.
Wow. So you get there after this long journey, and you see these signs. What happens next? How does it play out from there?
From there, it was really, our first trip was just figuring out, I'd read all the medical studies, but it was really just experiencing it, meeting them all, meeting their families, meeting the villagers, trying to deconstruct what is their secret sauce. Not only how do they live to 100, but how do they thrive to 100? Subsequent visits, we would later put together research teams with cardiologists from China, do genetic studies, analyze the DNA of all these people, do extensive medical histories, examinations. And every time I went there, I really was amazed. And we got there really at the right time in history because, as I've mentioned, when we first arrived there, they were still in this more traditional lifestyle, and that has changed so rapidly. This economic miracle of China has now reached even the most rural backwater areas of China. And so we've actually witnessed this transformation.
Unbelievable. And let me ask you, said you started doing some genetic studies. Did you find that there was any genetic variation in these individuals as compared to other individuals?
That's a great question. And that's initially what I thought is a little bit is coming at it from a physician, scientist. I've written many scientific articles. I've been an editor of medical journals. There was a little bit of skepticism there. And that's the way we're trained as physicians. And so that was one of the first things that we wanted to do is we got DNA samples from all these people and we ran it. And what we found is that their genes are no different than ours. For example, the FOXO3 gene, which is probably one of the most well-known longevity gene, they were no more likely to have a copy of that gene than we are. Or the MNSOD gene, which codes for cancer, cardiovascular disease, longevity. They, once again, no different than us. And so what we found is it wasn't the genes that they were dealt with, because that was what we initially thought. Small community, not a lot of, there's a lot of inbreeding. But that wasn't the case. Really what it is, it comes down to the small decisions, the small little health decisions that they make every day. And those decisions ultimately determine which genes get turned on, which genes get turned off. And so it really comes down to epigenetic factors, or how are their genes or their DNA blueprint, how is it activated based on the lifestyle decisions they make each and every day.
So their lifestyle decisions are actually allowing these genes to express themselves. But had they made other lifestyle decisions, those genes would not express themselves, and they would probably have the same rates as us.
Exactly. And there was even fascinating within the study, we did little sub-studies of this, as I had mentioned at the beginning of this interview, is that so many of the younger population left this rural farming community to go to the big cities of China. And interestingly, a large percentage of them, once they left the protective effects of the village, went to the big cities where there's pollution, there's stress, they're eating fast food, they're eating processed foods. As anybody who's been to China, there's a KFC, McDonald's, or Pizza Hut now on every corner. And as they partook of all of this, quickly they developed diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity. And amazingly, a lot of the younger generation, by the time they hit their 40s, decided that they had had enough making these iPhones or Gucci watches, and they left the big cities and came back to the village. And within a few months of changing their lifestyle, slowing down, eating real food, getting more physically active, reconnecting socially with their roots, one by one, a lot of these chronic medical conditions just went away.
Unbelievable. Dr. Day, let me just get a little more specific with you. To the people that did not leave this village, to the people that spent the entirety of their lives there, was there cancer present? Was there heart conditions present? Was there autism present? Tell us about those things.
So excellent question. So certainly I'll start first with cardiovascular disease. As a cardiologist, this was something I was quite interested in, and we could not find any cases of cardiovascular disease in this small village. And interestingly, there have been a number of centenarian studies looking at all the centenarians, not just in this village, but in this county of China. And in this entire county of China, if you look at the studies, cardiovascular disease is really only seen in about 4% of these centenarians, which is incredibly low.
What is the percent? What is the percent here?
So just for example, here in the U.S., if you take an 80-year-old, there's at least a 70 to 80% chance that they have some evidence of cardiovascular disease. Wow. And what we largely know, and this is right in line with Western research, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, really is about 20% from our genes or our DNA. 80% of it is really up to how we live our lives, our lifestyle. And so that's right in line. Cancer, I couldn't find any cases of cancer, and cancer is largely absent. There have been studies comparing these parts of China to the U.S. For example, breast cancer is 7 times lower in this part of China than, say, for example, in the U.S. Now, that's all changing. They want the lifestyle that we have, but at least historically with that traditional lifestyle, that traditional diet, that traditional way of being physically active and the way they connected with each other somehow protected them.
Unbelievable. What about autism? Did you see autism there?
That was something that was difficult to assess, and I did not see any cases of that. But once again, this is just a small village, 550 people.
Sure. I just wondered, because it's so fascinating to me that, they to some degree wanted the lifestyle that we have. And now we're looking back at it saying we want the lifestyle that they have, or at least we want the longevity aspect of it. And I guess we can all learn from each other. It's really just a decision and trying to figure out what are the factors that we need to take from them. And obviously there's some factors that they would prefer to take from us. Let's dive in. So what are the lessons that you would say that you learned from this whole study?
The first lesson, and it really starts with food, is to eat real food. All of the sugar in our diets, the processed foods, it is wreaking havoc on our genome, wreaking havoc on our DNA, activating all sorts of genes that we don't want activated. And starting first with just eating real food, eating food in its most natural state whenever possible.
And I have a question. I had read a study a long time ago about, I think it was the people that lived on Okinawa, and how the foods were much higher in minerals there because of the volcanic nature of the soil. And that the foods that we're eating now, even the natural tomatoes and things like that, may not have the same nutritional value or minerals that those did. Did you look at that at all? Did that play a part in this study at all?
That was something that we didn't see it. Now, for example, they did drink a natural mineral water, which is high in magnesium and some calcium and some of these other minerals. But probably the thing, and this is something that we can replicate here as well, is their farm to plate time was less than a day. In other words, the food, there's so many wild fruits, wild vegetables that are growing around there. They would collect them and then eat them on the same day. And there is something about nutrient degradation. For example, within about 3 days, the vitamin C content, say for example in broccoli, drops in half. And so it is important. And there are things that we can do here to try to minimize that, to maximize the nutrients in our food so you don't get that nutrient degradation, whether it's having your own garden, shopping at a farmer's market. There are co-ops, or even some of these flash frozen vegetables or fruit where as soon as they pick it, they freeze it instantly. You can preserve a lot of that, the nutrients, and prevent a lot of that nutrient degradation.
So, Dr. Day, you were telling us, so you're saying there was just an oily fish that they eat going through the river. Is that a big part of their meals?
There's these small little oily fish, and they would eat the whole thing. That would also include the calcium there, high in omega-3s, and they would have this fish once or twice a week, vegetables as part of their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But as far as animal meat, because they were so poor, they didn't have access to a lot of this with the Chinese Revolution and Chairman Mao failed economic policies. Really, animal meat was just reserved for the Chinese New Year festivals or marriages and that. And there they would eat the whole animal, nose to tail eating.
Yeah, no, that's unbelievable. Let me ask you that as we wind down here. I always ask my guests what they feel the holy grail of health is. From this study, from your viewpoint of what you've learned, what would you consider to be the holy grail of health for listeners?
I think for me, the realization is that our body has the remarkable capacity to heal, and that genetically, if you look at the studies, if we take care of our bodies, most people can reach age 90 in great health. It really is just a matter of getting out of the way, allowing our body to work the way it was designed to work, feeding it real food, being physically active, staying socially connected, embracing stress, having a life purpose. And if we can just focus on these simple things, and that's what really we try to share in the book, The Longevity Plan, that most of us don't have to experience this, all of the pain and suffering that so often comes as part of the aging process in the U.S.
Dr. Day, what a powerful interview, sir. How would people that want to learn more about you get in touch with you? How would they do so?
Well, first of all, the book, The Longevity Plan, is a great place to start. If they want to go beyond that, my website, drjohnday.com or the longevityplan.com, there they can learn more with the weekly blog, weekly podcast, ask questions, and would encourage people, if they want to learn more, to come join us.
Dr. Day, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. It was very exciting information, and I'm sure the listeners really got a lot out of it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode is sponsored by New Jersey Foot and Ankle Center in Oredo, New Jersey. Remember, when you have a foot problem, you've got a foot doctor in the family. Weekend and evening appointments are available. Call us at 201-261-9445. Once again, that's 201-261-9445. Thanks for listening. Check out the show notes over at drdanspeaks.com. If you're loving the show, head over to iTunes and leave us a review, and we'll catch you next time.